welcome to our Bible Ponder for this week. We're continuing our look here at the very last days of Jesus' life and looking in Luke chapter 22. So last week we got through the institution of the Lord's Supper. And during our chat about the institution of the Lord's Supper, we talked about the word for new, or the couple different words for new in Greek. In English, we just have one word, new, meaning new. Something was old and now it's new. But in Greek, there are two different words. One is new of the same kind, and one is new of a different kind. So we talk about the analogy of money, whereas you have an old fiver and a new fiver, and one is crumpled and old and one is new. Or you have a fiver or a debit card, which is new money. It's not just refreshed, it's new of a different kind. And that's the word that's used when Jesus says, this is a new covenant in my blood, that new of a different kind. Something is different, something has changed radically about the nature of the covenant. So that's where we got to last time. And so Jesus has been teaching all of his disciples. He's been teaching about love and humility and welcome and all of these things. And immediately after he institutes the supper here in Luke, and he gives out the bread and gives out the wine, he acknowledges that someone is going to betray him. They immediately start asking themselves who among the disciples will be the betrayer. And whether or not this is immediately after or it comes about naturally through the course of the dinner, Luke tells us in verse 24, a dispute also arose among them as to which of them was to be regarded as the greatest. And so they start to bicker over who's the greatest. Now, it could be that they're starting to ask who could be the betrayer, and then after that, they start to rank each other. I don't know, like they're middle schoolers or something like that. But we have to remember sometimes that this idea of humility is not always a virtue in every culture. Even today, a kind of low-level sort of understated humility, which is in some ways or in many ways part of our culture, especially here in Great Britain, is not necessarily part of every culture. And in some cultures, actually doing yourself up and talking about being great is more of a virtue than a sort of false humility. They see that as maybe disingenuous. And that was true in the ancient world. There were some philosophers who advocated a sort of humility and a servant-like nature like Jesus did. But not every teacher or philosopher did. And so for us, we're very, very influenced by 2,000 years of Christendom and 2,000 years of Jesus' teaching about greatness and about servanthood and all of those sorts of things. And that really lives in our culture so much that this sort of understated humility is just part of the way we do things. And so I think for us, especially, a dispute among them about who was to be regarded as the greatest can seem quite out there. Nevertheless, they have it. But he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those in authority over them are called benefactors. But not so with you. Rather, the greatest among you must become like the youngest, and the leader like the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. So he's flipping this idea of worldly greatness and kind of kingdom greatness. He's not mentioning necessarily the kingdom of God, though he'll mention a kingdom in a bit. But he's inverting this idea that the servant is not less great, even though at a banquet among normal people in the world, that would be kind of the hierarchy. You are those who have stood by me in my trials, and I confer on you, just as my Father has conferred on me, a kingdom, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Now that's quite a claim we've often talked about in this series and in other bits where you've heard me talk about how the 12 disciples stand in for the 12 tribes of Israel, and they're really symbolic in that regard, and especially here in this verse. This idea that in some eschatological kingdom, some end-time kingdom in the future, the 12 disciples will be the judges. Now, of course, Judas is about to betray Jesus. He is stricken off as a disciple, and Matthias is then chosen to replace him as a disciple. And then Paul also becomes an apostle. So you end up actually with 13 apostles. Not sure how that's going to practically work out. They might need to form a subcommittee in heaven to decide which disciple is going to get left out, whether it's Matthias or Paul. But we'll let them decide how that's going to work. Or it could be a sort of symbolic language about how they represent the 12 tribes of Israel. This is Luke representing that. Jesus immediately then goes, "Simon, Simon, listen. Satan has demanded to sift all of you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your own faith may not fail. And you, when once you have turned back, strengthen your brothers." And he said to him, "Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death." And Jesus said, "I tell you, Peter, the cock will not crow this day until you have denied 3 times that you know me." So this is quite interesting here that Jesus begins by calling him Simon, in his old name that he then changed, and then it ends calling him Peter. And I wonder just speculatively if this is about Peter, or as Jesus calls him in the beginning, Simon, being so gung-ho, so ready to follow Jesus to the end, even saying prison and to death. And Jesus, at this point, will know that he is going to be executed. He's been in Jerusalem long enough. He's seen the chief priests and the teachers of the law. He knows what they're going to try and do. And for him to also know that Peter is going to betray him, and he's got to just go, "Oh, Peter, like, I wish you were right." But the switch to the name Peter, for me, as I'm reading it here now, makes me think that this is Jesus sort of signifying, I know that you're going to betray me, but you're still Peter. He's not somehow going, "Well, you were Peter on the rock upon whom I will build this church, but you're going to betray me, so now I'm going to revoke it." He knows it's going to happen, but he still knows Peter, and he still perhaps loves him and welcomes him. He said to them, "When I sent you out without a purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything?" You remember those stories from earlier on in Luke. They said, "No, not a thing." He said to them, "But now the one who has a purse must take it, and likewise a bag. And the one who has no sword must sell his cloak and buy one. For I tell you, the scripture must be fulfilled in me. And he was counted among the lawless. And indeed, what is written about me is being fulfilled." So we move from this earlier time in which they're to go out without anything and be provided for, into now things are a bit more dire. And he's saying, no, now you need to prepare. Before, you were going out and counting on the hospitality of others, you were counting on being taken care of, but now that's not going to happen. Now, actually, things are going to get real. And so now you need to prepare. And he said, buy a cloak, or sell your cloak and buy a sword. And I think a lot of this language is pretty proverbial. It's pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? I think he's making a point by a lot of this, and he's not actually calling on them to pick up arms. He's talking about how they need to be prepared for what's going to happen, and to have their wits about them. And we get that because of the next immediate couple of stories. He says, "All right, so, all of this, be prepared. I'm about to, be arrested." Essentially, he says, and he was counted among the lawless. What is written about me is being fulfilled. That's the message. That's what he's saying. And they say, "Oh, look, we've got 2 swords over here. I guess we're good." And he goes, "All right, fine, that's enough." He's not after them to pick up arms. And that's clear throughout the whole of the gospel and the whole of the trial narratives and everything. He is not some military insurrectionist after them to get swords. And we'll see that right here. He came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he reached the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not come into the time of trial." Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down, and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." You might see in your Bible there two brackets that close around a couple of verses here. And the note in the NRSV says other ancient authorities lack verses 43 and 44. But they're included here because I think they are on good authority part of the gospel, although even some of the earlier manuscripts don't necessarily contain them. They might have seemed odd, and so they were left out early on or added in quite early on. But either way, I think they fit here, and I'll explain why. It says, "Then an angel from heaven appeared to him and gave him strength. In his anguish he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down on the ground." So both of these verses, we have the appearance of an angel and then sweat like blood. And you can see why maybe early on, if these were part of the original gospel, they might have been left out because they are a bit different. You have an angel and you have sweat like blood. Now, sweating like drops of blood is an actual medical condition. And so on some, you can either just read this on his face and take it, or some people are skeptical. They go, well, that's ridiculous. But it is an actual medical condition that can occur under great stress. It has been documented. And remember, Luke is a doctor. And so I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for this and these verses to be original to the gospel. And angels do appear in Luke at several points. Obviously, you have Gabriel, you have the angel who appears to Zechariah, and you'll have the angel at the end around the tomb. So angels are pretty common in Luke. And also, this is a medical thing that Luke could have been very well aware of, and so he includes it. And then maybe early on in the gospel, they were taken out and seen as maybe a bit weird and then added back in, or whatever you have. In any case, I think it's interesting to note that that is an actual medical thing that can happen. I would tell you the name if I remembered it. When he got up from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping because of grief. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not come into the time of trial." He repeats that. And in other Gospels, this sort of narrative kind of repeats that he then goes away again and prays and comes back and finds them sleeping again. While he was still speaking, suddenly a crowd came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, "Judas, is it with a kiss that you are betraying the Son of Man?" When those who were around saw what was coming, they asked, "Lord, should we strike with the sword?" Then one of them struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. In another gospel, it's Peter who does this, but Luke spares him the shame of naming him. But Jesus said, "No more of this," and he touched the ear and healed him. And so, as I said earlier, when Jesus is talking about, don't leave your purse, take your purse and sell your cloak and get a sword, he's talking about preparedness for what's about to happen, to basically steel yourself for his arrest. They're going to face the hardest thing they've had to face as his disciples, the arrest of their teacher and friend and his execution at the hands of the state. And he's telling them to be prepared, and they're hyper-fixating on the sword. And so when Judas brings the soldiers here, their immediate reaction, again, not getting it, is to try and attack with the sword. And Jesus says, "No, that's not, you missed the point." Then Jesus said to the chief priests and the officers of the temple police and the elders who had come for him, "Have you come out with swords and clubs as if I were a bandit? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me, but this is your hour and the power of darkness." There's some interesting stuff with the NIV, kind of words it differently because it could be a bit clunky in the original language, but the NRSV renders this fairly literally. This is your hour and the power of darkness. I think the NIV says this is your hour and darkness is part of your reign, or something to that effect. But what I really want to focus on, well, a couple of comments. First, that we've talked about how the chief priests and the elders and all of that didn't want to arrest him in front of everyone. They still don't really have a great case against him. But if they were to arrest him in front of everybody, it could start a riot because he did have quite a following. And so they are waiting for a specific time. And that's why Judas gets co-opted into their plot, so that they can find a time to arrest Jesus and not incite a riot and do it sort of on the quiet. And then once he's arrested, they're able to spin the narrative and get it so there's not a public outcry, and they are able to go ahead with executing him without too much trouble on behalf of everyone. We'll talk a bit about more of that in a bit, but there's this word here in the NRSV. It says, if you come out with swords and clubs as if I were a bandit. I think the NIV says, if I were leading a rebellion. It's one word, and it is a word that's often translated bandit, but bandit doesn't quite capture the whole of this word. And this is the same word that's used in the parable of the Good Samaritan, that there are robbers that come and waylay the man on the road. A bandit, and the word is lestes, is a violent insurrectionist, is probably a more accurate way to render it. The bandits were people, they probably lived in the desert. It can be a general term for a bandit, but it's not, like just a sneak thief. A bandit is a violent person, and someone, again, leading an insurrection or leading a rebellion, which is why the NIV chooses to translate that, do you come out with swords and clubs, as if I were leading a rebellion, because they get that sense of the word for bandit there. But that is the word that is the way they're treating him, essentially, and that's how he knows he's going to end up executed. And the two who are crucified on either side of Jesus, they're often called thieves, and we've called them thieves for many years because of our English translations. They are also bandits. They're also lestes. They're also violent insurrectionists. They are people who are out, as the NIV says in here, leading a rebellion. So he's not just crucified next to criminals, sneak thieves, just generic, sort of like cat burglars. These are also bandits, and so he is essentially being crucified as one of them, not as different from them, but as one. And that's why they also nail up the cross the King of the Jews as his charge, as if to say, this guy thought he was a king, thought he was leading an insurrection, but Rome has won. But we will talk more about that when we get to the story of the crucifixion. But we'll leave Luke chapter 22 here just now. We might go at a bit of a snail's pace over the next few weeks through the end of Luke, because there will be a lot to talk about. But we'll get into the rest of chapter 22 next week and see how far we get. So thanks for watching and for listening, everyone. I hope you have a good week.